Hello there, it's Cassie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I have the My Favorite Things Spotlight Poppies card kit. And this has been out for a little bit, and as far as I know, it's still available. So I will have that linked down below and all the separate pieces as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at what comes in this kit. So there's a lot of great elements in this kit. And like I said, I believe it's still available. As of filming it was. But to start off, we've got the Poppies Background. Isn't that gorgeous? It's on the cling rubber and it's big and beautiful, 6x6. And then it has these poppy blooms. So each of those pieces coordinate with that background stamp. And it also has the Poppy Blooms Die-namics. So you can use those to cut out that bloom and you can pop those right on top of that background so it looks pretty cohesive. As far as the papers in the kit, you are going to get some black licorice, some poppy, some orange zest, some pineapple, and some smooth white in 5 sheets of that. And so I'm going to only make one card this go round, but let's go ahead and get started with what I'm making. So the other day I had done a video on the Arteza 36 half pan watercolors, and I thought I would go ahead and give these babies a little bit more of a test run by using them with that beautiful background poppies stamp. So I also cut down some of the Arteza Expert 100% cotton paper, and I love that paper. It is a little pricey comparatively, but I think it's kind of worth it depending on what it is you're doing. So I cut some of that down, and I'm peeling off the backing paper to my Poppies stamp set. Typically I don't do that, but because this one came with its own stamp packaging, I wasn't as concerned, whereas my other ones from My Favorite Things haven't in the past. So I've cut down my Arteza Expert watercolor paper, and I'm actually using the smooth side. So there is a rough side and a smooth side, and I figured it would just be better to use the smooth side since I was planning to do stamping with this giant background using some clear embossing powder, or clear embossing ink, and that was from Brutus Monroe. So I'm stamping that down, and I'm using my stamp platform because that way if I don't get accurate stamping, which is hard to tell when you are using clear ink, but if I don't get it, I can put it back in there. And I've used my misty corners, which are extremely helpful in this situation because I tilted that towards the light and I could tell I didn't get all the ink on there. So I'm going to put that back in, hoping that I have it lined up correctly, and thanks to the corners, I do. And I stood up to push that down a little bit more, and putting that in the light, I can tell that I have the coverage that I need. So I'm going to cover that with my white embossing powder. Now, before I stamped anything, I used my Brutus Monroe magic powder bag, which is crucial when you are doing embossing of any kind, but especially on a giant background like this. If you don't do that, you will have an issue with powder getting in places you don't want. And since it's hard to see where the embossing powder is sometimes, or where it's going to melt, it's just better to use one of those. So I'm using my heat tool, and I have this tilted towards the light so I can tell when that embossing powder gets shiny, it's ready to go. And that's all I'm doing, is heating it till it's shiny. Now I'll pull out those watercolors, and here's where I start to have a little fun. I just wanted to play. I just didn't really have any rhyme or reason, or really even a color palette in mind. So I went with the purples. And so I'm putting some water into the pan, and I'm starting off by putting that water all over the poppy that I want to color as well. And I have to mention that I am using that 6-pack of water brushes from Arteza as well, because I really do like these water brushes. The little push tab to get the water out is really convenient. Sometimes I over push with my other water brushes, but this is nice because when you push it, it really does release a drop or two. And so that's nice for somebody like me who's a little bit heavy-handed with the water sometimes. So all I did, like I said, was I started out by putting some wet down, just some clean water, and then I put the watercolor right into that. And like I said, I'm just playing. So this time I kind of forgot to put the water on first, and I am having to hold up my paper, as you can tell, because if I just had it down, the only way for me to actually see where the lines are would be for me to put my head right on top of it, and you wouldn't be able to see the coloring if I had done that. You'd just see my head, and nobody wants to see that. So I've been holding it up in the light just so I can see where I'm supposed to be coloring. I have that wet wash of purple down, and so I'm now grabbing a little bit more, a darker purple, just to put at the where I think the shadowing might be. And I'm honestly not that concerned about the light source. I'm really not even that concerned about where shadows may or may not be. I'm really only wanting some variation in color on the poppies, because there would be a variation, just, you know, dark and light. And it's not going to be 100% accurate, but that's okay. So I'm moving on to another poppy, and I'm going to do the same thing I did with the first one. Just put some color down, put a little bit more water in with my watercolors, and then I'm going to start the darkest with the center and then try and pull that color out. And I did put a microfiber cloth on the table with me, so that way when I have either too much color or too much water, I can wipe that right off. And that's the nice thing about having a watercolor pan that is like this. This is a good price point, and so you don't feel so bad if you've put a bunch of color on your brush and then you feel like you have to wipe it away because there's too much. But if you have an expensive set like my Daniel Smith ones, when I get a little heavy-handed like that, I feel super guilty about wiping it off because those are so expensive. But these are a lot of fun. I really like working with the colors, and I'm getting the look that I was hoping for, just having fun playing. So now that all that first wash of purple is all over each of the poppies on this panel, I'm going to move on to trying and mixing some colors. So there isn't another purple in there, so I decide to take the purple that I already have along with this really deep blue. Originally I thought I'll put the blue down, and then I thought, ooh, no, I don't care for that. So I decide to mix some in my pan, and sometimes the hard part about mixing in the pan can be, you know, whether or not you actually have enough. And in this case, I did mix enough. So it's a deeper purple, or a little bit more blue purple. And this is where I'm taking and adding even darker shadows just in some of those areas and trying to pull that color out. And I will continue to do that for each of the poppies by adding that deeper blue violet into those darker shades or darker areas, just trying to get those poppies to have a little bit more variation in color. When all is said and done, I end up really liking how these poppies have turned out. And so now it'll be time to move on to the background color. So I've planned to use a yellow because yellow and purple are quite contrasting. And I am having to hold up my panel once again simply because I don't want to go over the stems. And the stems are very thin. And so I am just holding this up in the light, and I am taking this is the lightest yellow color in the pans, and I'm just going to put that color down all over in those spots. And these water brushes are nice because they have a nice pointy tip, and so I don't have any issue getting into the small areas. And just like before with the purple poppies, I decide to add some shadowing. So I've grabbed that darker yellow, which is more of a mustard, and I'm just putting it in areas. And because, you know, that's how watercolors work best, is in layers, I've just slapped down some color in some of those areas, and then I'm starting to pull that down before it dries. And you may want to work in one section at a time, but because I had so much color on my brush, I decided to put some of that color down in those various spots and then work fairly quickly just to make sure that it didn't dry before I was able to get to it. But keeping in mind that that yellow underneath the lighter yellow was still a little bit damp, so it was a little easy to work with in that sense. So I'm just putting it all on the bottom of the poppies. So anywhere there's a yellow panel, I just start from the top and I pull that color down, and it ends up giving a really beautiful shadow. So originally I thought, well, we could leave it yellow, but once I started putting the darker yellow in, well, obviously you have to keep doing it because, you know, once you start, you kind of can't leave it undone. But I think that the shadowing adds so much to it. And so I'm really happy with the choice that I made in those two colors. So I used that lightest yellow and that darkest yellow, which was more of a mustard, to get this type of a look. And I think it ends up being really, really pretty. All right, so now that we're done with the background, I do grab out my eyedropper that just has water in it. I put a little bit over that black, and it's kind of funny because I started doing just the centers black. I thought, well, that would be the easiest since I had such a hard time seeing where those centers were because of the embossing. I just went ahead and did black, and it does make it a little bit hard to tell, but it's okay. I end up really liking the way the flowers look, but I also decide that I want to do some splatter, but if you notice with my panel, there's something missing. I haven't colored the stems yet. So it's at this point, after I do all this black splatter, which by the way, these watercolors are really nice for splatter if you do like to do that. They leave a very nice, almost opaque color, which is super nice when you're talking about splatter. They're not so transparent, or at least the black was. And then it's at this point I realized, you know, you didn't color the stems. So even though there was splatter all over it, I had chosen a dark green anyway. So I switched my brushes. So I had been using the medium brush, and now I'm using the small round brush, and I'm just grabbing that dark green. And that tip is really nice because that embossing did make it a little bit more difficult to get into some of the stem areas. So I'm able to do a lot of really good coloring, or at least better coloring than if I had just used the medium round brush. And so the splatter was there, but it didn't end up causing too much of an issue, to be honest, because it was such fine misted splatter that it wasn't a big deal. So I'll go ahead and finish up those stems, and then we'll move on to the next part. Because this panel was bigger than the front of an A2 size card, I do trim it down, but I do save that piece because it's a lot of good coloring. And then I just trim off the little bit of the bottom, so that makes it a 4-inch by 5¼ inch piece, so that will fit very nicely on the front of an A2 size card and still leave a little bit of a border. And so I trimmed down some black cardstock, the black that came in the kit. That was the black licorice, and so that is now the size, it'll be the whole front of an A2 size card. I'm just going to go ahead and start assembling the whole front of the card. So I'll take some liquid glue and I will put that all over my watercolor panel, and then I will adhere that to my black panel, and then I'm going to take that and I will adhere that to the front of a top folding A2 size card, and this is just some heavyweight white cardstock. So it makes a very good base. And I'll just cover all that, put that down. And I like to use the liquid glue because it does give me a little bit of wiggle room. I've said that a billion times. I don't always put things on straight, so sometimes liquid glue is the way to go for me. And then I'll take that little piece that I cut down and I'm going to put that on the inside of the card to add a little bit of interest to the inside, and that way I didn't waste any of that paper and everything is cohesive. And so then I'll start working on the sentiment. My sentiment is going to come from a My Favorite Things set called Greetings and Salutations. It's a fairly new set, and so I put my magic powder bag all over some black cardstock that I had, that licorice, and then I'm going to stamp that down using some clear embossing ink, and I'll cover that with the white embossing powder, and then I'll heat that till that is smooth and melted, and then we'll get ready to start cutting that out. To cut out my sentiment, I am using the My Favorite Things Skinny Strips dies, and I just tacked that down with a little bit of washi tape, ran that through my Sizzix Sidekick, and there you go. So I didn't run the whole thing through, I just did it for one side, and then I'm going to take a little bit of liquid glue, I'm going to put that on the back, and then I'm going to adhere that to my front. And surprisingly, I got it on there fairly straight, so I held it up and kind of eyeballed it there. And then to finish off the inside, I grab another sentiment from that Greetings and Salutations set, and then I had a heck of a time getting it on the stamp block, probably about 3rd time's a charm. And then I grab my Brutus Monroe Detail Raven embossing, or not embossing, just detail ink, and then I stamp out my sentiment, and this card didn't need any more because there's plenty going on. So that's going to finish off this card. So I'll have some close-up pictures at the end of this video. If you liked this video, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already done so. And if you were interested in anything that I showed today, I'll have all that listed down below in the description box. And thank you so much for stopping by.